When you leave a narcissist, one of the first things that happens is something most people are completely unprepared for. You think the hardest part will be walking away. You think the hardest part will be packing your things, filing the paperwork, blocking the number. But what you don't anticipate is the backlash. Because when you leave, you're not just ending a relationship. You are threatening a system of control. And control is oxygen to a narcissistic personality. The moment they sense that control slipping, something shifts. You may see rage that feels disproportionate and shocking. You may hear words you've never heard before, cruel, cutting, deeply personal attacks designed to wound. Or strangely, you may see the opposite. You may see tears, grand apologies, sudden insight, promises of therapy, promises of change. In some cases, both rage and charm will come in waves, sometimes within hours of each other. Understand what's happening here. This isn't heartbreak in the traditional sense. This is panic. For a narcissistic person, you are not just a partner. You are supply. You are validation. You are reflection. You help stabilize a fragile internal structure that they work tirelessly to protect. When you leave, that structure shakes. And when it shakes, they scramble. The scrambling can look dramatic. It can look theatrical. You might receive long emotional messages about how you've destroyed them. You might hear that you're selfish, cold, ungrateful after everything they've done for you. They may suddenly rewrite history in real time. Now you were always the problem. Now you were unstable. Now you never appreciated them. This is not clarity. This is ego defense. And here's the part that confuses so many people. Sometimes the narcissist will escalate their affection. They'll love bomb you again like it's the beginning of the relationship. Flowers, long talks, intense vulnerability, statements like, "I can't live without you." It can feel intoxicating. It can make you question your decision. You may think, is this the person I fell in love with? Have they finally realized what they lost? But what you're seeing is not transformation. It's survival strategy. When control is threatened, narcissistic systems activate. They will do what has worked before. If intimidation worked, they'll intimidate. If charm worked, they'll charm. If guilt worked, they'll weaponize guilt. If triangulation worked, they'll bring in third parties. They are trying to restore equilibrium, their equilibrium, not mutual health. And if none of that works, sometimes the retaliation becomes more calculated. Smear campaigns may begin quietly. They may start telling friends or family their version of the story before you even have a chance to speak. They may position themselves as the victim. That's because image is everything. If they can't control you, they will attempt to control the narrative. Now, here's where you have to stay grounded. The backlash is not proof that you made a mistake. It's often proof that you made the right one. Healthy people may feel hurt when a relationship ends. They may feel sad. They may need space, but they don't go to war because someone chose autonomy. They don't unravel because someone set a boundary. When you see chaos erupt simply because you said, "I'm done," what you're witnessing is how dependent the system was on your compliance. And let's talk about the emotional toll on you during this phase. It can feel destabilizing. You might doubt your memory. You might replay conversations at night. You might think, maybe I overreacted. Maybe I could have tried harder. That's the internal residue of being in a dynamic where your reality was often questioned. It takes time for your nervous system to recalibrate. But the backlash phase doesn't last forever. What lasts longer is the clarity you gain once you see it for what it is. You begin to recognize patterns instead of reacting to performances. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You understand that someone fighting desperately to keep you under control is not the same thing as someone fighting for the relationship. Leaving disrupts the illusion, and illusions rarely go quietly. So if you're experiencing backlash right now, rage, love bombing, guilt, threats, don't interpret it as a sign to turn back. Interpret it as confirmation that you stepped outside a system built on control. And remember this, when someone panics because you choose freedom, it tells you everything you need to know. After the backlash settles, or sometimes right in the middle of it, Another consequence often begins to unfold, and this one can feel even more disorienting than the rage or the love bombing. It's the rewriting of the story. When you leave a narcissist, you are not just walking away from a person. You are walking away from a carefully curated image. And if there's one thing that matters deeply in narcissistic dynamics, it's reputation. It's how they are perceived. It's the narrative. So what happens when you exit? The narrative has to be adjusted, and often that adjustment does not favor you. Suddenly, people may look at you differently. Mutual friends may grow distant. Family members may seem confused. You might hear through the grapevine that you were emotionally unstable, too sensitive, impossible to please, or even abusive. The person who dismissed your feelings for years may now describe you as dramatic. The one who controlled you may now claim you were controlling. This is what we call a smear campaign. And it is not random. It is strategic. Understand this clearly. If they cannot control you directly anymore, they may attempt to control how others see you. Because if they can preserve their image and isolate you socially, they regain a sense of power. This can be deeply painful. Not just because of the lies, but because it hits at something fundamental. Human beings are wired for belonging. We care what our communities think. So when someone starts planting seeds of doubt about your character, it can feel destabilizing. You may want to defend yourself. You may feel the urge to explain your side to everyone. You may feel desperate to set the record straight. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Narcissistic individuals are often very convincing. They can be charming, articulate, persuasive. They may cry on cue. They may share selective screenshots. They may recount stories with just enough truth to make the lie believable. Meanwhile, you may be exhausted. You may be traumatized. You may not have the energy to mount a public relations campaign. So what do? First, you resist the urge to engage in the same behavior. The instinct to counter smear is strong. But when you start publicly attacking back, it often reinforces the chaos, and chaos is their terrain. You don't win by stepping into their arena. Second, you recognize that not everyone needs to understand your story. This is one of the hardest lessons in recovery. There will be people who believe them. There will be people who choose the simpler narrative, and that hurts. But the people who truly know you, the ones who have seen your character consistently over time, will notice the discrepancy. Truth has a different energy than performance. It doesn't need theatrics. It doesn't need constant reinforcement. Now let's talk about why the smear campaign happens in the first place. At its core, it's about shame avoidance. If you left, that implies they were rejected. And rejection activates shame. For someone who already has a fragile internal sense of self, that shame feels intolerable. So instead of processing it, they externalize it. They project it onto you. If they can paint you as the villain, they get to remain the hero, or at least the victim. And sometimes they truly believe their version. That's what makes it so unsettling. This isn't always calculated malice. It's often a distorted internal narrative that protects their ego at all costs. But here's what I want you to hold on to. Your job after leaving is not to manage their image. It is to rebuild your stability. If you spend all your energy correcting every rumor, responding to every accusation, chasing every misunderstanding, you stay tethered to the dynamic. The most powerful response to a smear campaign is consistency. Live your life in alignment with your values. Show up steadily. Be grounded. Over time, patterns reveal themselves. People eventually notice who thrives on drama and who thrives on peace. And yes, there may be losses. Some relationships may not survive the distortion. That grief is real, but what you gain in return is authenticity. You are no longer contorting yourself to preserve someone else's facade. The smear campaign can feel like an assault on your identity, but identity built on truth does not crumble because someone speaks loudly against it. You don't have to shout your integrity. You just have to live it. Because in the end, a reputation built on manipulation eventually collapses under its own weight, and a character built on reality stands without needing applause. After the backlash, after the anger, after the narrative gets twisted, there's another phase that often catches people completely off guard, and it can be the most confusing one of all, because just when you think it's over, just when you start to find your footing, they come back. Not always loudly, not always aggressively, sometimes softly, casually, almost innocently. A message that says, "I've been thinking about you." A memory shared, "Remember that trip we took?" An apology that sounds reflective, "I didn't realize how much I hurt you," or a crisis, "I really need your help. You're the only one who understands me." This is what's often referred to as hoovering, an attempt to pull you back into the dynamic. And the reason it works so often is because it doesn't usually look like manipulation at first. It looks like vulnerability. It looks like growth. It looks like closure. But here's what you have to understand. Hoovering is not about reconciliation. It's about reestablishing access. When you left, you disrupted their supply. You disrupted their emotional regulation system. You disrupted their sense of control. And once the initial chaos settles, they may start to feel the void, not necessarily because they miss you in a deep, mutual, empathetic way, but because they miss what you provided. You were familiar. You were responsive. You knew their patterns. You tolerated things others might not. That familiarity is comfortable. So they test the door. And the test can be subtle. A like on social media, watching your stories, sending a neutral, "Hey, these small touches are probes." They're checking, are you still accessible? Is there still an opening? Now here's where it gets emotionally complex. Because when that message comes in, your nervous system reacts, even if you were the one who left, even if you were strong, even if you were certain. You may feel a rush, anxiety, hope, anger, nostalgia, all at once. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. Narcissistic relationships are built on intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable cycle of affection and withdrawal. That unpredictability creates powerful attachment bonds. The highs feel euphoric because they are inconsistent. So when a Hoover attempt shows up, your brain lights up. It remembers the early days. It remembers the good moments. It wants relief from the discomfort of separation. And the Hoover often mirrors exactly what you longed for during the relationship. If you wanted accountability, they suddenly sound accountable. If you wanted affection, they sound tender. If you wanted commitment, they promise it. It can feel like finally getting the version of them you were waiting for. But sustainable change is not delivered through a text message. It is not delivered through one emotional conversation. It is demonstrated consistently over time with humility, therapy, accountability, and deep behavioral shifts. Hoovering skips that work. It aims for emotional reentry, not structural change. And sometimes, when the gentle approach doesn't work, the tactic shifts again. The warmth turns cold. The apology becomes accusation. "I tried to fix this, but you're impossible." This swing isn't random. It's about regaining control of the emotional temperature. If they can't pull you back with sweetness, they may try to destabilize you with criticism. The most important thing during this phase is clarity. Ask yourself what has actually changed, not what they're saying, not how they sound. What evidence exists that the core dynamic would be different? Because what many people discover painfully is that going back doesn't reset the system. It often intensifies it. Now there's an added layer. You left once, and that threatens their ego even more. So control may become tighter. Monitoring may increase. Punishment may be subtle but persistent. Hoovering is powerful because it targets your empathy. It targets your history. It targets your longing for closure. But closure does not require re-entry. Sometimes closure is simply recognizing the pattern and refusing to step back into it. And let's be very honest about something. You may still love them. You may still care. You may still wish it could be different. Leaving a narcissistic dynamic doesn't erase your feelings overnight, but love without safety is not healing. Care without respect is not partnership. When someone reaches back out, it does not mean you made the wrong decision. It means the system is trying to reassemble itself. The strength isn't in never feeling tempted. The strength is in pausing long enough to see the pattern clearly. Because the door they're knocking on, that door is your peace, and you get to decide whether it stays closed. Now, here's the part that surprises people the most. You get through the backlash. You survive the smear campaign. You resist the hoovering. From the outside, it looks like you've escaped. It looks like you've won. But inside can feel like a completely different story. Because even when you know leaving was the right decision, your body may not feel free yet. You may wake up reaching for your phone. You may feel a wave of sadness at random times. You may miss them intensely, miss the good moments, the inside jokes, the chemistry, the way they looked at you in the beginning, and then the guilt creeps in. Why do I miss someone who hurt me? What's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong with you. What you're experiencing is the aftermath of a trauma bond. Narcissistic relationships are not steady. They are cyclical. High highs, low lows, affection followed by withdrawal, praise followed by criticism. That unpredictability creates powerful biochemical reactions in the brain. Dopamine spikes during the love bombing, cortisol surges during the conflict. Then relief floods in when things temporarily calm down. Over time, your nervous system becomes conditioned to that cycle. It's not just emotional attachment, it's physiological. So when you leave, your system goes into withdrawal, just like any other addictive pattern. The chaos may have been painful, but it was familiar. Your body knew how to anticipate it. And now there's silence, there's space, there's no dramatic reconciliation, no intense arguments, no emotional roller coaster. And that quiet can feel unsettling. You might mistake peace for boredom. You might mistake stability for emptiness. You might even question whether the relationship was really that bad because your brain selectively recalls the good moments to soothe the discomfort of separation. That selective memory is part of the bond. And then there's the identity confusion layered on top of it. In narcissistic dynamics, your reality was often questioned, your feelings minimized, your needs reframed as excessive. Over time, you may have started doubting your own perceptions. So after leaving, when there's no one contradicting you anymore, you may not immediately trust yourself. You might replay arguments in your head, trying to determine what was real. You might analyze every memory, wondering if you were too harsh, too emotional, too demanding. This mental looping is common. It's your brain trying to reconstruct coherence after prolonged invalidation. And here's something important. Missing them does not mean you should go back. Craving contact does not mean the relationship was healthy. Longing is not evidence of compatibility. It's evidence of attachment. Attachment doesn't disappear just because logic says it should. Healing in this phase is not dramatic. It's subtle. It's learning to sit with discomfort without acting on it. It's letting a wave of nostalgia pass without sending a message. It's recognizing that your nervous system is recalibrating. There may be days you feel strong and clear, and then suddenly a song plays or you pass a familiar place and you feel like you're back at the beginning of the breakup. That doesn't mean you failed. It means recovery isn't linear. You're not just grieving the person. You're grieving the future you imagined, the potential you hoped for, the version of them you kept waiting to see consistently. That's a real loss, and it deserves compassion. But here's the shift that slowly begins to happen. The longer you stay out of the cycle, the more regulated your nervous system becomes. You start sleeping more steadily. Your thoughts become less frantic. You notice that you're not constantly anticipating criticism or conflict. Your body begins to feel safer, and safety can feel unfamiliar at first. When you've been in survival mode for a long time, calmness feels strange. You may even create small dramas unconsciously because chaos was your baseline. That's why self-awareness in this phase is crucial. Notice the urges, notice the cravings, but don't automatically obey them. This is detox, emotional detox, nervous system detox, cognitive detox, and detox is uncomfortable before it's liberating. Over time, the fog lifts. The idealization fades. You begin to see the full picture, not just the highlights. You recognize the patterns without romanticizing them. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a while, stability within yourself. Not because someone is reassuring you, not because someone is validating you, but because you are learning to do that internally. Leaving a narcissist doesn't just end a relationship. It initiates a recovery process, and that process requires patience, self-compassion, and discipline. But here's what I promise you. If you can endure the withdrawal without going back to the source of the pain, your nervous system will eventually choose peace over chaos. And when that happens, you don't just break the bond, you break the cycle. After the withdrawal begins to settle, after the emotional waves aren't quite as sharp, something quieter, but just as profound can emerge. And this one catches people off guard in a different way. It's the identity question. Who am I now? Because here's the truth about narcissistic relationships. They don't just drain your energy. Over time, they reshape you. Not in loud, obvious ways at first. It happens subtly. You start filtering your words more carefully. You soften opinions that once felt strong. You shrink preferences that once felt clear. You adjust your personality to avoid conflict. You become hyper-aware of their moods. You anticipate reactions. You manage the emotional climate. And slowly, without realizing it, you move further and further away from yourself. So when you finally leave, there's relief, but there's also disorientation. You may notice that simple decisions feel harder than they should. What do I like? What do I want? What do I believe? You've spent so long calibrating around someone else's needs, someone else's ego, someone else's volatility, that your internal compass feels muted. This isn't weakness, it's erosion. In narcissistic dynamics, your reality was often challenged. Your feelings were reframed. Your memories were questioned. Over time, that kind of chronic invalidation creates self-doubt. You may have begun to ask permission for things you never needed permission for. You may have apologized for having basic needs. You may have internalized the idea that you were too much or not enough at the same time. So when you're finally alone, without that constant feedback loop, it can feel like standing in a quiet room after years of noise. At first, the silence is almost uncomfortable. You might even feel strangely untethered. Some people describe it as feeling blank. Others feel restless. Some feel unexpectedly small. That's because identity isn't just about preferences. It's about confidence in your own perceptions. And that confidence may have been slowly chipped away. There's also grief here. You may look back and realize how much you compromised, how many times you swallowed your truth, how often you dismissed your own intuition. That awareness can sting. You might feel anger at yourself. Why did I tolerate that? Why didn't I leave sooner? Be careful with that self-criticism. It keeps you in the same dynamic, just internally. Instead, recognize this. You adapted to survive. You adjusted because you were trying to make it work. You minimized yourself because that felt safer than constant conflict. Those behaviors were coping strategies. They were intelligent at the time, but now they're no longer necessary. Rebuilding identity after leaving a narcissist is not about dramatic reinvention. It's about small, consistent reclamation. It's asking yourself simple questions and honoring the answers. What food do I actually enjoy? What music do I like? How do I want to spend my weekend? Who do I feel safe around? What values matter to me? At first, these questions may feel surprisingly difficult. That's okay. Identity rebuilding is like strengthening a muscle that hasn't been used in a while. It takes repetition. You may also notice something powerful begin to return. Your intuition. That quiet internal voice that once told you something was off, but you overrode it. As you spend more time away from invalidation, that voice grows clearer. You start trusting your gut again. You notice red flags sooner. You feel less compelled to justify your boundaries. And that's when something shifts from survival to empowerment. Because here's the deeper consequence of leaving. You don't just lose the relationship. You lose the version of yourself that existed within it. And that loss can feel confusing. but it also creates space. Space for authenticity, space for alignment, space for relationships where you don't have to shrink. There may be moments where you miss the intensity, where you miss the drama, the passion, the emotional charge, but intensity is not identity, and drama is not depth. As your sense of self strengthens, you begin to realize that calmness doesn't erase you, it reveals you. You start speaking without rehearsing. You start choosing without fear. You start setting boundaries without over-explaining. And maybe most importantly, you stop negotiating your worth. Identity reconstruction is not loud. It's steady. It's you remembering who you were before you started doubting yourself. And often you'll find that you're not just returning to an old version, you're becoming a wiser one, because you now know what it feels like to abandon yourself. And once you've experienced that, you become far less willing to do it again. Leaving a narcissist doesn't just free you from them. It gives you the opportunity to come home to yourself. And there is nothing more powerful than that return. And then slowly, almost so quietly you don't notice it at first, something extraordinary begins to happen. The chaos fades. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, the noise that once filled your life starts to thin out. The constant second guessing, the scanning for mood shifts, the rehearsing of conversations in your head, the walking on eggshells. One day you realize you made a decision without fear. You expressed an opinion without bracing for backlash. You had a peaceful evening without tension simmering beneath the surface, and it feels unfamiliar. For many people leaving a narcissistic relationship, peace is the most unexpected consequence of all. You thought the biggest consequence would be loss, loneliness, maybe even regret. But what begins to surface instead is space, emotional space, mental space, physical space. No more unpredictable explosions, no more silent treatments hanging in the air, no more wondering which version of them you're going to get today. At first, that steadiness can feel almost boring. When you've been conditioned to intensity, calm can feel flat. Your nervous system, so used to spikes of adrenaline and cortisol, doesn't quite know what to do with stability. You may even find yourself waiting for something to go wrong, but nothing does. And that's when you start to understand something profound. Safety isn't loud. In narcissistic dynamics, love often felt intense, passionate, urgent, but urgency is not intimacy. Intensity is not connection. When you step outside of that cycle, you begin to discover a different rhythm, one where conversations don't turn into competitions, one where disagreements don't turn into character assassinations, one where you don't have to prove your worth over and over again. You begin to trust your own perceptions again. That might be the most powerful shift of all. You no longer need someone else to confirm that what you felt was real. You don't need to crowdsource your reality. You feel something, and you allow it to be valid. That's freedom. And with that freedom comes something even more transformative: choice. In a narcissistic relationship, so much of your energy went into management. Managing moods, managing perceptions, managing conflict. When that management role disappears, you get that energy back and you can invest it in yourself. You may pursue interests you once abandoned, reconnect with people you drifted from, set goals that once felt unrealistic because you were too busy surviving. Your world expands again. And here's something people don't talk about enough: your standards rise. Once you've experienced manipulation, gaslighting, emotional volatility, you begin to recognize it more quickly. The red flags that once felt confusing now feel obvious. You no longer rationalize them away. You don't explain them into something harmless. You trust that discomfort. And because of that, your future relationships, romantic or otherwise, start from a different foundation. You are no longer looking for someone to complete you or stabilize you. You are looking for someone who complements a stable version of you. That's growth. Now, does this mean there won't be moments of sadness? Of course not. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about integrating it. There will be days you reflect on what happened and feel anger or grief, but those emotions won't control you the way they once did. They become information, not identity. You'll also notice something subtle but powerful. Your self-respect strengthens, not the loud performative kind, the quiet kind, the kind that says, I don't tolerate that anymore, the kind that doesn't need to announce boundaries. It simply enforces them. And perhaps the greatest consequence of leaving is this: you stop abandoning yourself. You stop negotiating your worth to keep someone comfortable.